guys, and welcome to another episode of the Sassy Talks. It's been a while since we did the last episode, but we are back and we are back with a bang. Today, I have a very special guest. This is someone I met in the S11S roadshow that we did in Delhi, and I'm glad I did. I came across Madhav Bhandari, who's leading the marketing. He's the head of marketing at Storylane at this moment and has a decade of experience in the SaaS ecosystem, specifically working with a lot of early stage companies, which is where I got really excited and wanted to have Madhav on the podcast. Just to get a lot more insights for the viewers, for you guys, of course, and that's why we have him here. Madhav, thank you so much for coming in and on this podcast. It's a lovely to have you here.
Happy to be here, and again, thank you for kind of doing those kind of SaaS events that you did, like the one in Delhi, right? Because it's a very small knit community, but there's
Right.
hard communities to meet. So that was a awesome event. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. And yeah, like happy to kind of chat. Like maybe like a quick introduction about me. Is just like Ishan mentioned, I'm the head of marketing at Storylane, and I previously I've been in SaaS for almost 12 years now, and I've led marketing for a bunch of companies. But like my expertise is kind of around the early stage marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, excited to dive in.
Absolutely. So, Madhav, straight up, early stage, because we also work with a lot of early stage companies, right? And I feel this is a very different challenge altogether, and probably the toughest journey of the SaaS company or any company, as a matter of fact, right? So, you've been in the early stage system for some time, right? I saw your LinkedIn. You've worked with a bunch of early stage companies. You were the first hire in many of these, first marketing hire, first product marketing hires in many of these companies. Uh, is there a specific, love for early stage or early stage challenges that you have, or was it like by default this just kept happening, or was it like a conscious decision that you made? Okay, I want to be in the early stage scenario.
It didn't start out as a conscious decision. It was more like like when I first entered into SaaS, right? It was more like I came into I wanted to start my own business, right? But I didn't
Got
know
it.
how. So then
Okay.
I said that, okay, you know what? Let me just kind of understand it by just working at a
Of
startup,
course.
right? And I started off with an early stage startup, and then it was a small company called Flinchpad, and I was basically like the sales, marketing, customer success, literally everything. Like the third
Yes,
hire
of course.
in a team of four, basically.
Yes.
So I think that's when, like, just working hands-on in all of these different departments, right? Like, I enjoyed that. And then I started writing about my experiences, and then got like, one or two big breaks after that, right? So
Yeah.
then I think where I consciously started to think about early stage was that, I also joined a late stage company, and, I realized what are the pros and cons of early stage and late stage. And I got a call with like this Sequoia board member, and then I basically spoke with him, and he's like, "Listen, man, there are very few people, in the market that can actually take a company from like 0 to 1 million, and this
That's
is
right.
insane space to be in, right? Like, and if
Yeah.
you have that kind of skill set, I think you should double down on it." And I think that was when I was like, interesting. And at that time, I think this was like maybe 4 years or 5 years ago when I spoke with that Sequoia person. And then he also said that they are investing like 70% of their fund onto SaaS companies.
Yeah.
So I knew
Yeah.
the market was big. So that's why I was
Yeah.
like, what, just kind of do what I'm really good at.
Yeah.
And I think since then I've just been consciously taking that early stage decision. And it's like it partly came from that, but it's also partly just that I think at early stage, what I've realized is that, you got to start with a blank slate.
Yeah.
You have creative freedom. Anything that you do has a measurable impact, right? A good campaign can kind of, drive up revenue by 5%, 10%, right? That
Right.
doesn't happen in late stage companies, right? So
Yeah.
limited by boundaries. It's more a people management job at that point versus kind of like actually being
Absolutely.
like contributor, right? So there are
Absolutely.
lots of those things. So I think it's more like, what do you vibe with? I vibe with early stage.
Yeah, yeah. I completely resonate with that. For us also, coming into early stage or working with early stage clients was just a stroke of luck. It was not something that we consciously decided. I had a similar experience, by the way, with one of the Sequoia people, who also, when I was telling him that we're working with early stage, a similar experience, similar kind of a feedback was given, and that's why we also ended up becoming Sequoia Surge partners, right? Because there is a big gap in the early stage. There is no support system. The problem I feel that comes in is with respect to at least outside vendors or agencies, even consultants, as a matter of fact, is the cost factor, right? With the early stage, with any other agencies, the cost as a business decision, there is a minimum commercials that they want to charge, and with early stage, that is probably the biggest constraint. But I would completely agree with you. I think the enjoyment or the fulfillment working with early stage, get going from a 0 to 1 million ARR, for example, which is very tough, and the probability is very low, is just next level. Right now, we've started working with a bunch of later stage companies as well. It's not the same. It's a different game. We are earning more, definitely longer contracts also. But with early stage, the fulfillment is something very, very different. Right. So I'll jump the idea with these podcasts that I do, and I get folks like you, is to get many insights from your experience, and you have more than a decade of experience, and you work with so many early stage. So I'm going to shoot with a lot of questions around those. I want to start with we had a very brief conversation during in Delhi, and over chats. Demand gen is something that is one of your core expertise, and you've led that over these years, right? When we started, I'm sure when you started, definitely, and when I also started, it was more lead gen, right? There was only lead gen as the terminology being used, which was simple to understand, right? You want to generate leads. Then when I started doing this business, the last year only, I think the demand gen became a buzzword, right? Um, what exactly, according to you, because you've seen a long journey in demand gen, in lead gen, right? What is exactly demand gen? Can you clarify for our viewers, and how exactly is it different from lead gen? What I've seen is people are confused till date, and I would be very open about it. Even I get confused. I have also gone on Google and tried to just figure out what is the difference, right? Please help us understand that, Madhav.
Yeah, so count me in that gang as well. I think it's almost like there is no specific definition. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer this
No
properly,
worries.
but I think there's two or three things in here, right? Like one is, I would also say that, I mean, this maybe is kind of like a disclaimer that within marketing, right? Like the same things keep getting rebranded again and again. We
That's very
started
true.
like 10 years back with growth hacking, and then
Yeah.
inbound thing, right? And then like all of these things come, right? And just like that, lead gen kind of became demand gen, but like I mean, I think there's more to demand gen to that. So let me just kind of get to that, right? So mainly, like when we think about demand gen, we basically break it into three aspects, right? There's demand creation, there's demand capture, and there's demand
Yeah.
conversion, right?
Yeah.
So um, basic creation is when when there's no existing demand to capture, so you need to kind of create new demand, which is a lot of what we're doing right now at Storylane,
Yeah.
uh, because it's an early category.
Yeah.
Demand capture is kind of like the standard playbook we've seen over the last 10 years. Oh, you operate in an email marketing software or live chat software, and there's just already a lot of knowledge and information about it, right? So there's already a lot of existing demand, let's say in
Yeah.
terms of keyword search and everything,
Yeah.
and you kind of capture that demand, right? And then when it comes to demand conversion, it's like, all right, now you've captured this demand. How do you convert that demand, right? Like, so
Hmm.
you could do that through conversion rate optimization. You could do it through email sequences. You could do it through demos. Like, there's all sorts of things, right? But it's basically kind of taking this from a perspective. But the reason why demand gen kind of became much bigger right now than just lead gen was because um, so lead gen typically basically meant that you get X leads and then you get Y conversions, right? Like, it
Yeah.
was very straightforward linear
Yeah.
path that
Yeah.
where you get 200 leads, out of that 20 will sign up, one will become a paying customer, right?
Yeah.
But and you'll have a direct attribution source that, okay, this one came from Google, this one came from YouTube, this one came from Instagram, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I feel that buying journeys have evolved quite a bit from 5-10 years ago.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
like buyer today is recommended products from places you didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So there's a very there's a very nice picture that I've seen floating around quite a bit, where it's like um kind of like, I don't know if you've seen that. There's a picture of like an ocean. There's like an iceberg where the tip is
Yes.
visible, right? And
Yeah.
so most of the buying journeys where marketers are perhaps, trying their best, it's just a tip, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of the decisions are taken, behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So when I say closed doors, it's things like Slack communities, people meeting at, like an S11S meetup
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
recommending products to each other, right? People kind
Reviews, sites, and all of
of,
those, right?
right? Like, and even like in terms of like how somebody discovers a product, it's such a different journey, right? Like, for example, they'll see an ad, they'll forget about you. They'll see a newsletter sponsorship somewhere there. They'll be like, okay, good, I've seen this person twice. And then they'll see a LinkedIn post from somebody, and then they'll see an article from us, and then they'll
Yeah.
see us at the event. And like at the fifth, sixth touch point, they'll actually sign up. But the issue is previously that sixth source was basically attributed as like the
Last
main.
touch.
Yeah, the last touch, exactly, right? There was first touch and last touch, but like what happened to the journey in between, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe you took those decisions. So that's when I think, where demand gen comes in is that, it looks at it from a more holistic point of view that, okay,
Correct.
listen, we have a multi-attribution journey for a buyer. Let's accept that. And let's look at it from the perspective that, okay, where are leads coming from? Where is the demand being generated? Where are they kind of finding us through kind of booking the demos and everything, right? And at multiple touch points, the sources change, right? Like, so
Right.
for example, your traffic sources might give a different story
Yeah.
versus, what you get from like the sales calls and people saying that, oh, I found you through this and this, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's yeah, on a broader level, that's what happened with from lead gen to demand gen, that the
Got
buying
it.
journey built and the companies had to evolve to that.
Amazing. Amazing. That's a really good perspective. I think with respect to the entire journey, I think that is the major difference where demand gen actually came into picture. I completely agree with you. Thank you so much for that. So with early stage, so demand gen, when you say demand gen, what are the channels that you look at? And let's consider a scenario you coming in as the first marketing or the product marketing hire in an early stage company. When you think of demand gen, which is probably something that the founder or the team is also hoping for, that's what they've been reading about, that's what they've been hearing from others, right? Demand gen is what they should focus on. What are the channels that you look at?
Yeah, so I would say that it's more like it completely depends on like the software in the company,
Of
right? And it
course.
also depends at the stage at which you're joining, right? Like for me, mostly what makes sense is when I joined somewhere where, you're at 300, 400K ARR, where,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have tried some channels, you have some predictable lead sources that are coming in, right? Where you have some knowledge and assumption, and proven assumptions that
Yeah. Yeah.
this is who our customers are, these are what our personas are. So
Yeah.
then you can kind of find it, right? But let's say when you're coming from a zero like, from a background where let's say the product is kind of just Figma screenshots, right? Or the product has like maybe, I don't know, $100 in MRR, right? Like that also happens when you're
Yeah. Yeah.
early
Of course.
marketer, right? Then the approach is different, right? Like then it's kind of more like, how can we, let's take our best assumptions. Let's try to do like 200, 300 different things and see which one kind of sticks, right? So these
Got
are
it.
two different approaches, but like more, what more relevant is for your listeners would be the 400, 500K journey where,
Absolutely.
it was mostly done, right? So I think at that time, where usually what happens is that, there is some learning from the CEO, there's some learning from the product that,
Yeah.
okay, we have our assumptions that these, well, not proven assumptions that these are our customers, right? So, for example, when I came in at Storylane, I knew that, we were targeting salespeople and marketing people
Yeah.
because we're an actor demo platform.
Yeah.
And I had some idea the kind of personas we are going for, right? So the first thing we did was basically looked at like, where is it that all of these folks are hanging out, right? Like, how are they kind of spending their time at work, right? And then you start kind of looking at everything, right? Like, so they might be searching for solutions on Google or YouTube, right? They
Yeah.
might be working with folks at in-person events like the S11S, or or remotely through a Slack community or through
Yeah.
LinkedIn
Yeah.
or through Growth Mentor or whatever, right? Or they might be kind of, watching like a webinar or listening to a podcast or learning, things, maybe attending an on-demand course, right? And
Yeah.
once we kind of identifying these, like these are all the places where we could reach our persona, right? Now this becomes more like an investment portfolio where it's like, okay, you have all of these stocks in your portfolio, right? Now, what is the right blend in terms of, like highest in growth opportunity, lowest in risk, or whatever is
Hmm.
the risk profile of the CEO? and the company in terms of cash finances, right?
Right.
Like if looking for like insane growth, right, you'd go for some high ceiling growth channels. If you're looking for more sustainable growth, you might look for a more moderate ones, right? So that's what we looked at, right? And
Nice.
then I guess it just completely depends on like if there's an existing demand to be captured, right? You just start diving in, look for
Right.
the keywords, where
Right.
it like in that I would look at maybe SEO ads, right? These would probably be good starting points, right? Even
Absolutely. Yeah.
social, I guess, has been kind of growing quite well. But when it comes to perhaps demand creation, right? You have to go think a little beyond, right? Like you have to think about like, can you think around, uncovering information that cannot be answered by ChatGPT, that cannot be, given by experts or anything, right? Like, so think of it more like a Gong Labs kind of an initiative where you
Yeah.
basically take your own user data and try to kind of do that, right? Like create that demand. The other opportunity that you could look at is see if there are any adjacent categories where there is an existing demand to be captured
Right.
and try to drive that demand to your new category, right?
Right.
So there are different ways you can kind of address this. In like at Storyline, what we've gone for is that okay, we know that the market 5% people know about interactive demos, but 95% don't. So
Yeah.
95% is the big opportunity.
Yeah.
5% already kind of capped out. So 95% is where we are focusing on. So
Yeah.
there's a heavy investment on, be it on SEO for adjacent categories. There's a heavy investment on social, right? Like trying to like really put us out there. There's a heavy investment on video. We're trying to be a very, video focused company, right?
Right.
So I think it's just, yeah, it's kind of, I guess, like this for
Perfect.
me.
Yeah. So basically, Storylane is like a new category creation, right? If I'm not wrong.
Correct. Yeah, you can say that. Yeah.
Sort of, right? Obviously, in the last 2, 3 years, this
Yeah.
category has evolved, but comparatively, it's a new category, right? And so, as you perfectly mentioned, I think it depends on the scenario where you are at, right? So, if you come in for the day one or at your early stage company as a head of marketing, what I understood is that first sit down and understand where you are at, right? That is most important. Uh, do you have certain validated hypotheses, or as you mentioned, some proven assumptions, right? If you have that, do you have some low hanging fruits with respect to demand that is already existing so that you can capture that immediately, and then also figure out the ICP that you have, which is sort of proven. uh, you understand where they hang out, right? Which channels do they hang out, and then map it to your what is the risk capacity of the company, what is the runway period that you have, what is the kind of budget that you have, and then figure out what channel. So early stage companies generally don't end up having a lot of money to burn in Google search or LinkedIn ads. Then I think, as you mentioned, SEO becomes important, social becomes really important. Awesome. Now, one thing that I want to understand, right? This is perfect, right? This is so thought of, and I think it will be very helpful for anyone, thinking of, joining a new company, because we do get a lot of young audiences as well. What I want to understand, which is something that I've always seen, and I've asked multiple people on this podcast, and I want to hear your perspective as well. Most of the Indian SaaS companies, for obvious reasons, want to target US, right? And want to set up their GTM in US and want to scale, right? There are certain clients who want to first, probably create a revenue source in the Indian market, because comparatively it is easier. But then effectively they want to enter the US market. I've seen almost 90-95% companies struggle and fail during the US demand, right? Is there anything different that, anything that you can share with us that someone should, as a founder of an early stage company or a head of marketing of an early stage company trying to establish in the US? What is that, couple of things that they should really, really focus on?
Yeah, got it. I think you'd be understating that. I think pretty much every SaaS company is targeting US. Like I'm always surprised when I see a SaaS company that says that, okay, we're focusing only on India. Okay,
India.
and I'm
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the main thing. Um, but I think for me, I've never looked at any geography when marketing because I think, like in my opinion, it's impossible to focus your marketing of efforts on a particular geography, right? Like you can't control where your website traffic will come from, right? Like when you
Right.
do your search, you can't focus that, okay, I'm just gonna get US, right? Or I'm just gonna get all of this, right? Like there are certain things you can do, but like largely it's out of your control, right? So what I instead do is I focus on the persona, right? And basically just try to
Amazing.
do a good job at serving them. And I think one of the big things where Indian SaaS companies can really crack the US GTM is first is do things better than their US counterparts. Okay, like that's probably like rule number one, which is where most Indian SaaS companies fail, right? They're doing things, but they're not at the same level at
Yeah.
the US counterparts, right?
Right.
That basically means maybe creating a better piece of content or doing a better podcast or
Agreed. Agreed.
creating greater demand than the US
Yeah.
counterparts, right? Or creating more noise than the US counterparts, right? Like
Right.
this is, I think this is something that we need to understand that if we need to reach that market and beyond, we ourselves have to become better
Yeah.
at things, right?
Yeah.
Then I think the other thing that I always tend to do is I talk to a lot of folks in that geography, right?
Hmm.
And understand the terminology, kind of immerse yourself in the culture.
Right.
So start having those, conversations with them, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you start to understand that there are certain perhaps sales terms that might be slightly different in the US than
Agreed.
what is used in India or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Even I feel like I think the gaps are much narrower now, right? Like pretty much we're all kind of the same, but you start
Yeah.
understanding that there are certain trends that you just tend to see. Like for example, in the US, there's a lot of focus on automation, right? Because
Yeah.
talent is so expensive. But
Yeah.
in India, it's not the case, right? So
Yeah.
now that's a topic that can be explored in detail, and that would relatively attract a lot more US folks than Indian
Yeah.
folks, because in India it's like, okay, let's just hire another person, right?
Yeah.
uh, so I think it's more, I would say, yeah, like these two things, right? Like just do it better than the US counterparts, and then the other is just perhaps talk to a lot of folks in that market, start understanding them, behaving like them. I think you'll get there. But I think on the at the crux of it, it's more like if it just has to be that you just have to do a good job at serving the ICP and do it better than anybody else. And I think
Got it.
you'll reach the right kind of geography.
Got it. So basically, what I could understand from you and what I've seen is that people make it a very complex just with the the perception that it is the US market. I think what you were saying is that have the basics right, and the basics says that understand your ICP, right? I think it's the content that you produce, the campaigns or the experiments that you whatever that you do is to serve those the ICP, the prospects that the accounts that you want to target. So well said. I
100%. And I think what I'd add here is that what's often ridiculous for me to see when I see the Indian SaaS companies, like
yeah
they'd be spending like 10K on their content, right?
yeah
I'm talking right, 10K per month on that, but they'd be okay to spend 50K on a breakfast roundtable in the
yeah
US, right?
yeah
Completely different reach, completely different. It's just an issue with misplaced priorities, right? Like
right.
just doing event in the US is not going to help you kind of reach that persona
Agreed.
itself.
Agreed.
So
I think with the US, this is also I am I cannot say that it is a myth, but I completely agree with you on this point. I also have the same kind of a feeling when I see people spending so much on breakfast and closed door dinners and all of those things. I think this is also a kind of a myth with Indian SaaS founders. They've been told for a very long time that you have to do this if you want to crack the US market. I'll tell you this. In one of the podcasts with one of the person that I was staying, he actually mentioned this specific point as well, that in the US, the kind of the kind of people or the culture that there is, you have to do those kind of closed door dinners and those kind of things, and of course that's a lot of expense. I think with early stage companies that they're just adapting to what the world is talking about, but as you also mentioned previously, you need to understand where you are at, right? And accordingly plan and strategize for what steps you need to take. So yeah,
100%. And I think the another good example of that is that when you think about like think of a company like Browser Stack, they never kind
yeah,
of focus on US or anything, right?
yeah,
Browser Stack is a global company, right? Like and you kind of see that in them. Like they're
yeah,
not worried, okay, we're gonna focus on our geography. We're just gonna be the best at what we are at.
absolutely.
Another good example is Rattle, right? I don't know if you've heard of
Yeah,
those guys.
I know Rattle. Yeah, amazing company. Yeah,
It's amazing, right? And you'd be surprised to see. I was seeing it on LinkedIn. They have a lot of folks in India. I
yeah.
think quite
The
a
founders are
significant.
also Indian.
Correct, right? I think all three founders are Indians, right?
Yeah,
But you
yeah.
never think of them as kind of like a Indian SaaS company.
Indian style, absolutely. I think what you said is absolutely like just do it better than the people, or at least at par at what the US market, because those guys are much more mature, and you need to accept that, right? With respect to specifically, see, content, I feel is the most crucial part, and I'm sure you agree with that, right? And if you just compare the content that Indian SaaS companies produce, be it your how the landing page or the website looks like, the product UI, the social posts that go out, I think there's a huge difference in how they are doing it and how we are doing it, right? And I that is why, from inside, I'm like, wow, this is bang on. This is what I wanted to hear. Not everybody can come out and say this, right? And this is something that we need to accept. We are not doing a good job, and that is the reason we are failing. It's not that the US market is complex or they're not ready to buy from India. I think very well put. Thank you so much for this. This is amazing. I'll move to content because, as I mentioned, right, you also are a person with a lot of background in content, and in your LinkedIn, you've also written internally you are the chief content officer at Storylane, and that clearly shows because I was talking Storylane as well. And for any viewers, if you look at Storyline, the content that you produce, you'll be impressed for sure. So Madhav, content-led growth is also another concept that has come in recent times, right? And I'm as far as I know, you are also a believer in that, right? And it's not it's a fact. I think content-led growth is pretty strong, and if you can create a solid foundation, you can go a long way, and it's probably the most sustainable way to grow, right? Can you talk about, with respect to, let's say, early stage companies or mid-size or enterprises, is there a difference? Do enterprise products or large companies that are serving enterprise accounts, is there a difference in how the content led strategy looks like? Or, and very honestly, what I want to ask is this a really crucial tool that early stage companies are probably missing out on? Because content led growth is does not really resonate with the high budgets or high expenses, right? What are your thoughts on it?
Yes, I strongly believe. I think content, like, I mean, I generally believe that content is marketing in today's world. I don't think
Absolutely.
these are two different things, right?
Absolutely.
Uh, if you see today, like from an enterprise perspective, let's talk
Yeah.
about that, right?
Yeah.
Salespeople use content to sell products, right? You might
Yeah.
have a customer which comes in saying that, like I'll give you an example. At Storylane, we might have a customer that comes in saying that, oh, do you have a use case of putting interactive demos in blog posts, right?
Hmm.
And at that time, it would be amazing for the salesperson to have kind of like a report, an internal data report that actually proves that yes, it does have an impact in terms of page engagement and bounce rate
Right.
and conversions, right?
Right.
And that can tip the favor, tilt the favor in your favor, right? And there's a lot of other examples, like you see prospects asking for these all of the times, like, do you have any example of, how you've kind of helped a similar company like ours, right? And that's why the case studies come in, right? And like all of those things come in, that's also content, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's more like 5 to 10 years ago, right? It probably made sense at that time for PLG companies to focus on content because it was mainly focused on that. Okay, let's create content, let's get conversions. We don't have a budget to hire a sales team, so it
Yeah.
makes kind of sense for us, right? But the world has also evolved. I think what we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, right? Buyers today are doing a lot of research on their own.
Yeah.
They are trying to draw conclusions on their own,
Yeah.
on which to buy or not, right? And instead of you kind of putting your fate on some other blogger or some other company's blog, you should take it in your hands, right?
Yeah.
You should to like get that visitor in and help kind of guide the narrative around your product, right? So
Right.
I feel like it's across everywhere. G2 reviews are also content, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Videos are also content. Like LinkedIn is also content. Like all
Yeah.
of this is content, right? And I think content isn't just blogs, content
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
just so much, right? So, and then I think to your second question, like, does it evolve, depending on like what kind of an audience you sell to, right? So I generally feel when you think about more enterprise products, right,
Yeah.
it's becoming a lot more about, how you can kind of create content for
Hmm.
multiple
Segments.
personas, right? Like for example, there are a lot of buyers in the cycle. You have to convince a lot of
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
right? So you have to also kind of address all of those separately in your content, right? Then the
Right.
other thing is that for enterprise, you need to create A lot of noise,
Yeah.
because like these kind of decisions, it becomes a lot easier if out of the nine buyers, nine people in the decision cycle, if one person is passionately saying that, oh, I've these guys are amazing and all of that, right?
Yeah.
It the deal much faster, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it kind of goes around that. Like, how can we kind of, reach a very wide audience repeatedly, and just give great content out
Yeah.
there that actually accelerates the buying cycles, right?
Right.
And then if you're coming to
True.
more small and medium businesses, right? Like you can then start using content to perhaps guide them into, particular issues that they're facing, right? Like, for example, if you're an SEO tool, right, your focus could be how can you enable a scrappy SEO team in a startup to actually mature as like a very educated organization,
Right.
an SEO team, right? And in that journey, you can kind of pitch yourself easily, right?
I understand.
I really feel with small and medium mid-market, or I'd say mainly small, like a lot of like demand capture, a lot of, I'd say, like things like, just conversations around how people do their role differently, right? Like if you
Yeah.
target heads of sales, get on a conversation with them, ask them how they do their job, how they
Yeah.
handle situations, and then kind of address that, right? So
Right.
these are just different ways, but yeah, I mean, I think it's for everybody.
Awesome. One thing that you've been constantly in every question that I put up, constantly that you're talking about, which I also feel is the most important part, is the discovery of your audience, right? The audience research, which you're saying, like, have those conversations with this ICP. Again, I feel, let me your thoughts. Do you think that is also something people miss out on? I'll give you my thought around this, right? What I feel is that in most cases, at the early stage, it's more founder driven, of course, right? And the founder has identified this problem from his past experience. Generally, that's how SaaS companies are built, right? They've been working in some corporate or some SaaS company or some, have the experience, they identify a problem and they build a solution around it. They have when the product starts building, I think this is something that people miss out on. It is the audience research, like actually getting on the calls, not selling, but actually talking to them. uh do you have you always to this, like, this is something that I will always do and have always done?
I think whenever you kind of join a company, you're super passionate.
Yeah.
Like the first 30 days, 60 days, you'll get on a lot of calls, you'll understand,
Yeah.
uh, you know, you'll have a very good understanding of the product, right? But as you mature into your role, you just
Yeah.
stop having those calls, right?
Yeah.
And then what tends to happen is that like we just operate under the assumption that our buyers' needs won't change, they won't
Yeah.
evolve, right? And then you hold those old assumptions, right? So what, and but it's also obviously difficult to, every time schedule a call, right? So like, for example, what's worked good for me is just that, so initially I did those calls, and then what I do is like, every couple of, 2 or 3 months, I would get on a call with the sales
Yeah.
lead, check in with them, like, hey, how's the pipeline looking? How's the conversations looking? Any new
Nice.
learnings and all of that. The
Nice.
other thing we do is we use a tool called Crane, which basically records all of the customer demos, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes it's almost like a internal Netflix series for us, where it's like anytime you want to kind of go binge watch an episode, right? So I saw that, okay, there was an interesting demo we did. Let me just go watch it and see, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just
Wow.
go understanding, oh wow, like this is interesting. This is an interesting
Yeah.
perspective. And then I
Nice.
think works well for me. So, like for example, at Storylane, I run a video series called GTM on the Go, which is
Yeah.
like a short 15-20 minute conversations, right? So there's two sides to it. Of course, there's a marketing side to it, but it's also very helpful for me to just be like to talk with these folks about just their jobs, like
Right.
how they're doing it, right? And then that also uncovers like a very different level of insights. You start to understand that, okay, these are just some emerging topics these guys are thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are things I didn't know about. These are knowledge gaps that I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think over time you just do that, right? Even for me, like for example, I recently kind of have started like going deep into like the pre-sales function because it's a very
Mm-hmm.
misunderstood. So what I generally tend to do is I go to the gym, right, and the next 1 hour I will listen to 5 episodes of a pre-sales
Wow.
podcast
Wow.
and just kind of get that understanding, right? And then right while you're doing that at the gym, right, like right after your workout is done, I like my Google Keep is just filled with like all of these ideas that we could do.
Nice.
Uh, so I mean, I think it's all of those things, but like at
Yes.
the end, whatever works, just definitely keep talking.
Absolutely. Impressive. This is great, man. I didn't know, Madhav, that you are so engrossed and you love your work so much. And I think this is something that everybody should, aim for. You should love your work. I think this is very clear from your experiences that you're sharing with us that you definitely love your work. And that's why, obviously, and that translates into, success also. Um, all right, very quickly, right? We don't have a lot of time in our hands, of course. Very quickly, there are two things that I want to understand, right? I'll move outside demand gen content and everything. It's more towards the leadership role that you have been playing, right? Marketing is very subjective in nature, and this is again a common question that I keep asking any leadership folks that come in here. Marketing is very subjective, and now specifically since you work with early stage, that means you have your founders that you interact with, right? Where the decision making or the approvals or the brainstorming, right, in general, not the decision making as such, but brainstorming is with the founders and all the top leadership, right? Because it's so marketing is so subjective. Second, early stage companies are so founder driven, the mindset has to translate. How do you convince these kind of stakeholders? Because I'm sure you would come across situations where you have a different hunch or different understanding than what is on the table with other people sitting there. How do you tackle this?
I think first is there's a couple of things. One is I think you should have strong self-confidence in
Okay.
know that you've been hired for this role. So like you kind of call the shots within marketing,
Right.
right? Of course. So like don't just trust yourself. Like ultimately whatever decision you take, like is perhaps the right decision, right? There's a lot of years of experience and conversations and trust from these folks that actually come with that, right?
Right.
And I think the other thing I would say, which is probably even more important than this, is that set expectations from the beginning who takes the final call. So, like, usually, for example, with my CEO and I'll be like, okay, these are kind of like the major themes we need to focus on. Who owns, like the KPI, right? Like, so there might be a revenue KPI, there might be a sign up KPI, there might be all of these different things, right? Like, so who owns what, right? And ultimately, whoever owns that is basically kind of takes the final call, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've seen a lot, like sometimes, CEOs will be like, okay, no, I don't agree with this. I don't agree with this, right? But it's important to hold your ground because obviously with an open mind, right? Like you might be
Of
wrong
course.
as well.
Of course.
But like what CEOs like is that when people come in with their own point of view and a strong point of view, right, which you can spar on to be able to find the right solution, right? Like if everybody, if you worked in a company where CEO is right and everybody just does what the CEO does, right? Like obviously you've seen those companies where they go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So and CEOs know that they expect that, at least the good ones that I've worked with. I've been
Yeah.
fortunate there. And I think do that, right? And then these are the only two key stakeholders, like you and the CEO are like the major ones that decide 80%, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else give their opinion, take all that feedback, marinate over it, and decide ultimately which one you want to take, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just more about collecting feedback.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would probably be my suggestion.
Right. I think this comes with experience also, that self confidence that you're talking about. I think that is most important with young folks joining in with 2 3 years of experience. They definitely, when a founder says something, that they hesitate a little, because I think they also understand that they can be wrong. The probability could be high because they still have a lot to learn. So I think keeping an open mind is important. Taking the opinions, as you mentioned, is very important. But keeping the expectations right is probably the most important aspect, just in the initial days. Wonderful. Madhav, one last question, and I'll, leave you then. I want to understand, what does Madhav Bhandari's stack look like? So when you join a new company, I'm sure there's a certain expectation that you have with respect to the stack that you need, right? How does your stack look like?
So I think as of today, I don't have a preferred tech stack because I
Okay.
think my favorite tech stack became obsolete every 3 years. And I've just accepted that I'll embrace any environments that I inherit
Right.
as long as this,
Amazing.
right? Because it's like, a tool that made me happy 3 years ago now is just like there's much better tools out there, right? Like so
Absolutely.
I basically work my way around the tools we have, right? And as long as they're kind of doing their job well, it works out. Like for me, like some of the ones that have been like mainstays, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, please.
WordPress is my preferred CMS. Google Suite, right? Like the
Of
docs and
course.
the Google Sheets and all of that. Like I prefer to work in them just for the simplicity. The Google Search Console, Google Analytics, all of that for the like I use them even today, like as I've
Nice.
used for like past 10 years.
Hmm.
I like Slack and Notion and Loom for
Nice.
async communication, right?
Yeah,
Like I big believer in that. Um, Storylane, use
of
it all the time.
course. I was waiting for that one.
In terms of like, AI is also now a big part of our
Yeah,
workflows, right?
yeah,
Prefer Chat GPT plus and or copy AI. Both of these are equally good. And then in
yeah,
terms of like actual analytics, I think Mixpanel is pretty good. But
yeah.
honestly, like Mixpanel Amplitude, it's just about like getting used to their interface. Ultimately, it's the
Absolutely,
insight. So
absolutely.
that I think my tech stack.
All right. Thank you so much, Madhav. Off the record, also, it's been a pleasure connecting with you, having this podcast. I would really love to have more conversations with you in the future. I think you're one of those folks that I have met who are very honest, very uh, like your all your answers, not answers, basically every thought that you have is very, it shows the experience that you have. It shows that you've seen a lot in the past. I myself personally have been very, last 30 minutes have been very, very, insightful for me as well. And I feel great to see people like you calling the truth out. I think that is most important. I think one of the most biggest problem with people individually, I think, is that they are scared probably, or they don't wish to call out the truth and, take that kind of a path. I think you've done really well. I would love to know you more about Madhav Bhandari and how your life has been, and what are your plans in the future, for sure. Thank you so much, Madhav. It's been a pleasure having you on this podcast.
That's so kind of you. Yeah, I loved being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You can carry on with your work. It's 2:45, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
And thank you once again. I'll keep in touch with you.
yeah, yeah. All right. Thanks.